Before he was the lord of the Nazgûl, before his voice carried death across the fields of Gondor, he was a man, a great king of men, proud, powerful, and wise, who ruled long before the ring of power was ever forged. But like all kings, he feared one thing above all others: the end of his days. No one remembers the man he once was, and that is where the mystery begins. For even Tolkien never revealed his true name, or the land he ruled. We only know that he was mighty among men, likely of Númenorian descent, and that his downfall began when Sauron offered him one of the 9 rings. Those rings were gifts, or so they seemed. They promised strength, wisdom, and the power to command others. And for a time, they delivered exactly that. But with every year that passed, the rings bound their bearers closer to their master's will. The kings of men became shadows, trapped between life and death, the Nazgûl, and among them, one rose above the rest. The first, the strongest, the one who would lead all others in Sauron's name. He became the Witch King of Angmar, but long before that title, he was simply a man who refused to die. If you had seen him in those first years, you would not have known his fate. He would have looked no different from any other king of men. Proud, tall, commanding. Perhaps his throne stood in a marble hall beyond the Sea of Rhûn, or in the shadowed kingdoms of the south. He may have worn silver, or black, or gold. He may have ruled thousands. But the shadow was already at his door. Men of power never believe they are being corrupted. They tell themselves they are only using darkness to defeat darker things, that they can master what others fear. And so it was with him. The ring did not claim him in a day. At first it was a whisper, a faint promise of greater command, clearer vision, longer life. The armies obeyed more easily. The borders held. The crown grew heavier, but so did his will. And then one day, the sun began to feel too bright. Food lost its taste. Voices around him became distant, hollow, meaningless. The world was slipping away, and he did not even notice. What began as a tool became a chain. The ring did not give him immortality. It gave him endless existence, an unending half-life where the body fades, but the will cannot die. And slowly, the man who had once ruled a kingdom became nothing more than a shadow in service to another. Tolkien wrote that the Nazgûl appeared first about 2250 of the Second Age, long after Sauron had begun to gather his strength once more. That means the Witch King endured for thousands of years, long enough to see the rise and fall of empires, long enough to forget his own face. His body faded, his name was erased, and his soul was drawn into the void that served the will of Sauron. Yet the Witch King was different from the others. Even among the 9, he stood apart. When Sauron fell at the end of the Second Age, destroyed by the last alliance of elves and men, the Witch King did not perish with him. He lingered, hidden and patient, until the world was ready to fear again. It is said that he returned about the year 1300 of the Third Age, leading dark forces in the north. But by then, he was no longer a man, only the echo of one. And that is what makes him so terrifying. Not because he was born a monster, but because he became one so slowly that he may not have noticed when it happened. One day, he woke, and there was no heartbeat, no warmth, no name, only the ring and the command that bound him. It's easy to see him now as a figure of pure evil, the shrieking wraith, the slayer of kings. But somewhere, in the earliest years, there was a moment when he could have chosen differently. A moment when he could have let go. He didn't. He held on, and that more than anything sealed his fate. For the Witch King was not created by fire or spell, but by fear. The same fear that lingers in every mortal heart, the fear of the end. And so, when we see him cloaked in shadow, crowned in malice, we are not seeing a stranger. We are seeing what happens when a man tries to live forever. When he returned, it was as if the north itself had summoned him. The mountains were colder. The ruins of old kingdoms lay buried beneath snow and silence. And in that silence, a shadow began to rise again. Around the year 1300 of the Third Age, the Witch King reappeared, no longer as a mere wraith serving from afar, but as a ruler in his own right. He founded a realm called Angmar in the icy wastes beyond the Etten Moors, and made his fortress at Carn Dûm, a citadel of black stone carved into the mountain's roots. There he gathered his armies, orcs from the north, trolls from the frozen peaks, and men twisted by fear and greed. Some say even spirits of the dead answered his call. Under his command, Angmar became a kingdom of nightmares. But his war was not waged through armies alone. He was patient, colder than the land he ruled. He knew the weakness of men better than any living being, for he had once been one of them. And in the north, he found that weakness in abundance. The great kingdom of Arnor, once founded by Elendil himself, had long ago fractured into three rival realms, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudor. Brothers had become enemies, and the line of Isildur was fading into legend. The Witch King did not need to conquer them by strength. He let their pride and division do his work. He corrupted the hillmen of Rudor, turning them into servants of Angmar. He sowed distrust among the Dunedain, and unleashed wave after wave of darkness from the mountains. Centuries passed, battles fought, kings slain, borders erased, until only one of Arnor's realms remained, Arthedain, ruled by the last true heir of Isildur. And then came the final war. In the year 1974, Angmar struck with all its might. The armies of the Witch King swept across the north like winter itself. For Nost, the last capital of Arnor, fell. King Arvedi was driven into exile and perished in the frozen bay of Foreshell. The northern line of kings was extinguished, or so it seemed. The Witch King had achieved what Sauron himself had once failed to do. He had erased the legacy of Elendil in the north, but his victory did not last. A year later, the forces of Gondor, led by Eärnur, son of King Eärnil, sailed north to avenge Arnor. Elves from Lindon and Rivendell joined them, and together they shattered the armies of Angmar in a final, burning assault. Carn Dûm fell, and the Witch King fled into shadow once more. When he faced the elven Lord Glorfindel on the battlefield, the immortal's words sealed his fate. Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. It was not a threat. It was prophecy, the kind of truth that only the firstborn could see. The Witch King escaped, broken, yet unbowed. His northern kingdom was gone, but his hatred endured, and somewhere deep in that void where his soul once lived, he began to hear a familiar voice calling again, the voice of his master, rising from the ashes of Barad-dûr. The world would come to believe he had been defeated, but in truth he had only been recalled, for his crown would rise again, not in the frozen wastes of the north, but in the black heart of Gondor itself. When the Witch King fled the ruins of Angmar, he did not vanish. He returned to the place where all shadows go, to Mordor. By the time he came again into the east, Sauron was stirring. The Dark Lord had returned to Dol Guldur in secret, rebuilding his strength under another name, the Necromancer. But he had not forgotten his greatest servant, and when the time was right, he called him home. It was the Witch King who rebuilt the Order of the Nazgûl, gathering the scattered wraiths back under one will. When Sauron finally revealed himself again in Mordor, the Nine rode forth at his command, black riders upon horses that feared neither fire nor light. And at their head was the Witch King, no longer a king of the north, but the Lord of the Nazgûl. His master gave him a new throne, the city of Minas Ithil, once a shining watchtower of Gondor, now corrupted by shadow and renamed Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. There, in halls of pale green light and whispering screams, the Witch King ruled as Sauron's second in command. His fortress stood opposite Minas Tirith, the White City, like a reflection of death, staring into the face of the living. From that place, he waged a war of fear, for his greatest weapon was not the sword or the whip, but despair itself. Wherever the Nazgûl rode, courage withered. No mortal could look upon their captain without feeling his will bend. The men of Gondor called him the Black Captain. To his enemies he was death made visible. And yet, for all his power, he was still a servant, forever bound to the one who ruled him. During the War of the Ring, his presence haunted every corner of the world. It was he who led the assault on Osgiliath, who broke the gates of Minas Tirith, and who stood before the city with fire in his blade and prophecy at his back. When Gandalf the White faced him upon the walls, the two Maiar servants, one of light, one of darkness, confronted each other at last. And for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. But fate had other plans. Even the Witch King, with all his ancient might, could not escape the words spoken long ago upon the battlefield of Fornost. For it was Éowyn, shield maiden of Rohan, a woman, and Merry, a hobbit of the Shire, who struck the blows that ended him. "No living man may hinder me," he declared, his voice like thunder. And Éowyn answered, "But I am no man." Steel met shadow, and with a cry that split the dawn, the Witch King of Angmar was undone. So ended the greatest of the nine, not in triumph, but in the fulfillment of a prophecy he never understood. He who had once defied death, who had lived beyond the span of men, was finally granted what he had most feared: death. But death is not always defeat. For the Witch King's story is not just about ruin. It is about the cost of immortality. And in that cost lies a truth even the Dark Lord could never master. When the Witch King fell on the fields of Pelennor, it was not just the death of a servant, it was the closing of a circle. Long before he became a wraith, long before his name was erased, he had been one of the proudest of men, likely of Númenorian blood, descended from a people who once defied the gods themselves in their hunger for immortality. And in the end, he fell for the same reason they did. That is the quiet tragedy of the Witch King. He was not born evil. He was a man who wanted more time, more power, more control over the things that slip away from us all. And when Sauron offered him those things, he did not see the chains being forged around his soul. Every time we meet him in Tolkien's legendarium, whether as the unseen master of Angmar, the shadow on the walls of Minas Tirith, or the cold voice leading the Nazgûl, we are seeing the echo of that choice, the echo of the moment he believed he could master death. In that sense, the Witch King is not just a villain. He is a reflection, a dark mirror held up to the race of men. Tolkien wrote that the downfall of Númenor came from the same desire to escape mortality, to claim the gift of the Valar for themselves. The Witch King is what happens when that desire finally wins. His story is a warning, a reminder that immortality, without grace, becomes a curse. Even Sauron could not save him. When the ring was destroyed, the nine were consumed in fire, their forms torn apart with the unmaking of the one that bound them. And yet the memory of the Witch King endures, in every whisper of fear, in every tale of the north, where the wind still howls through broken ruins. Some believe his spirit was annihilated, burned out of existence when the ring was unmade. Others wonder if something of him remains, a voice without a body, drifting like ash in the void beyond the world. But Tolkien leaves that door half open, as he so often does. Perhaps that's what makes the Witch King so haunting. He is not just a relic of Sauron's war, but a reminder that evil never begins in the shadow. It begins in the heart, in ambition, in fear, in the refusal to let go. When Éowyn faced him, she did not just slay a wraith, she shattered an idea. That power and prophecy belong only to the mighty, that fate itself cannot be broken by courage. It was a woman and a hobbit, standing together in defiance of doom, who ended the greatest terror of the Third Age. And that is the heart of Tolkien's world. No matter how vast the darkness, it is never immune to light. Even the smallest spark can end an age of shadow. The Witch King's tale, in the end, is the story of a man who tried to outlive his soul, and the price of that attempt was everything he once was. He sought eternity and found only silence. Yet through him, Tolkien shows us something essential, that mortality, the very thing the Witch King feared, is not a curse at all, but a gift, a release, a grace that even the mightiest cannot claim by force. When the Black Captain fell, the world turned toward dawn. The ring would soon be destroyed, and the long shadow of the Second Age finally lifted from Middle-earth. But even in the light of victory, the memory of the Witch King remains, a crown of shadow, still burning in legend. A warning whispered through the ruins of Angmar and the empty halls of Minas Morgul. The lesson is simple but eternal. He who cannot die will never truly live. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark history of Middle-earth, make sure to subscribe. There are countless mysteries still waiting, from the fall of Númenor to the secret origins of Sauron himself. Join me next time as we uncover the forgotten corners of Tolkien's world, where myths and memories never sleep.